10 manga enter, but only 10 can be the champion. Which of these stellar works will take home the coveted participation trophy on this week's episode of Yappy's Manga Mania? Alright, you know the drill. Let's get into it. Here's 10 good manga that will make your life better if you read them. Gachiakuta is trash. Just a total trash manga with a trash story. In a good way, of course. Yeah, Gachiakuta is a new shonen, everybody has powers kind of story, but the unique twist of this one is its focus on trash. In a cruel society with huge wealth inequality and a ton of wastefulness, the main character Rudo grows up on the lower rungs of the societal ladder and is treated like trash. But one person's trash is another person's shonen protagonist, as they say, so against all odds, Rudo rises up against the corrupt hierarchies of the society and triumphantly gets framed for a murder and thrown off a cliff. Yeah, Rudo gets thrown into the abyss where all this society's trash is dumped. Of course, it's not just an abyss, because otherwise the manga would be over, so when Rudo finally lands, he finds himself in a whole new world down below with wild-ass trash monsters formed from all the trash that the society from up above throws down here. Thankfully, in the face of these monsters, Rudo's shonen powers awaken and give him a way to fight and figure out what the hell is going on. The power system is actually a really fun concept in Gachiakuta. Basically, seemingly plain old inanimate objects can have power drawn out of them by certain people who call themselves janitors. Usually the item is precious to the user in some way or special or something, but Rudo has the unique ability to find the treasure in any trash, so literally anything can be his weapon. The story progresses in a way that you might expect, in that he joins an exclusive society of janitors who fight trash monsters and stuff. And when you know it, they're often attacked by an even more secret society of evil power havers. Yeah, it's shonen stuff, but the execution here is super good, and there's pretty good class commentary in there to spice things up. It's just a really fun read because the power system makes for super creative fights, and the story isn't afraid to play with your expectations and throw in curveballs just when you think you know where it's going. This has got to be my favorite ongoing, kinda standard shonen at the moment, and it has a lot of promise and a good sense of mystery to its world, so keep your eye on this one if you want some high quality garbage. Keshi is a manga by one of my favorite artists, Cobysoft Joe, but they're not an artist who's known for typically doing manga. They mostly do 3D art with a surreal and whimsical approach that combines toy-like aesthetics for its creative character designs with psychedelic and wildly imaginative worlds. This approach gives Keshi a look and feel unlike any other manga, but its strengths aren't just in the visuals. The story follows Keshi, a sentient eraser who's on trial for a whole bunch of crimes, some of which are more like acts of revolution than boring old crimes, but anyways. Yeah, the trial has the judges looking into memory crystals that show us how Keshi went from a simple fruit delivery driver for a massive, mysteriously sinister corporation to stumbling into leading a Gurren Lagann-style space revolution by the end of things. It's a fun ride that's over in a flash, but it packs in so much fun that it'll feel longer than it is. Maybe that's because this story will be part of a larger one eventually, because this manga will be part of Cobysoft Joe's game called Dome King Cabbage, which is one of my most anticipated games because of course it is, just look at it. Anyways, give this one a shot if you're down to read a manga done in 3D, because there's so few of those, or if you just want a concentrated dose of really fun storytelling in a setting like you've never seen before. Okay, I thought I was going to be able to hit y'all with an unappreciated gem from a well-known author's past, but they just had to go and make an anime adaptation of Sandland by Akira Toriyama that looks really good and comes out this year, I guess. Okay, putting that aside for a second, Sandland is currently still a pretty unknown little story from one of the biggest people in manga ever, which I find super interesting. Especially because typically I'm not that much of a fan of Akira Toriyama's stuff. Like, not that I think it's bad or anything, it just doesn't grab my attention in any way. Maybe it's the long, drawn-out, sprawling nature of Dragon Ball that holds me back the most from liking it, because the short and tightly compact story of Sandland had me turning pages like a librarian. Sandland is set in this desert world where the only source of water is greedily hoarded by a king. So, of course, who do you call when you're up against a tyrant like this king? Well, the devil, of course, but he can't be bothered, so his cool little devil son is on the case. From there, him and a ragtag group of dudes go on a road trip, battling weirdos and trying to make their way to the king. This is a really goofy adventure story, which structurally is pretty standard. Like, it's just rebels taking down corrupt leaders without too much analysis of the structures of power at play. But what Sandland excels at is having this captivating, whimsical tone, full of weird characters and tons of wacky stuff. The pacing is spot on, the world feels really well realized for such a short story, and of course the art is immaculate, with Akira Toriyama having some of the best sense of page layout when it comes to illustrating action. It's just such a fun ride from start to finish, so give this one a shot if you love a good road trip style adventure, or you just want an action comedy with fun surprises around every corner. Usuzumi no Hate isn't the first story about a solitary character wandering a post-apocalyptic world, but it is one of the most unique I've seen, especially in how tender and thoughtful it can be. Our main character, Saya, walks a barren world which was ravaged by a mysterious disease brought to Earth by hostile aliens that's wiped out like 99% of humanity. Saya's job is to look for any survivors as well as find affected people's corpses and lay them to rest, hoping to eventually cleanse the city of the disease and maybe allow for it to be safe again someday. It's a little vague as to how Saya is even able to survive and not be affected by this disease, but the first chapter makes it clear that she's more than just a regular human. The journeys she goes on can be surprisingly quiet and contemplative, something similar to like Kino's Journey or something. But other times it can veer into directions that remind me of Blam with its dark intrigue and bursts of intense action. It's a story that continued to surprise me and has gripped me with the incredible potential to its world building. Like, this just started relatively recently, but I've got a lot of faith in where this is headed, so definitely check this one out if you're into cyberpunk post-apocalypses and want to see some incredible art and some really memorable stories. An Invitation from a Crab by Panpanya captures a specific sense of childlike imagination that I think pretty much only this author is able to create. The initial setup for this one feels familiar though, in that it has a very Alice in Wonderland type of opening, but instead of a rabbit, our main character is chasing a crab. This is a very different kind of rabbit hole though, as we won't go on a whimsical adventure, but instead a series of slice-of-life absurdity. You got a little story about their grandma giving them ever-increasingly complex toys to the point where they look like alien tech from another dimension, and then just as the absurdity reaches its peak, we get told the grandma died and we see all the toys in one room looking not quite as complex as we remembered. Then the main character remarks how complex her grandma's calligraphy was and how she hopes to be able to read it someday. All this weirdness evokes the feeling of kind of being a kid and not being able to understand the adult world and how advanced the things your grandma understands can be. There's a lot of storytelling done through abstract vibes like this, and it leaves a lot of things open to interpretation, and it does a great job of making you feel something even when you aren't quite understanding what the story is exactly about. Now, it's not always trying to say something deep, and sometimes the chapter is just funny, like this one where we walk past a bunch of crying people. Like, what could be going on to make all these people so sad? Oh wait, it's actually just someone doing a demonstration of an onion slicer. Never mind. Stories like this make for a weird and fun read with a lot of variety and unpredictability that makes it feel super unique. Adding to that feeling is the dreamlike way the manga drifts from hyper-realistic styles to loosey-goosey, ultra-simple cartoonishness. The art is experimental and simply amazing, so even if you're totally lost, you can enjoy this manga purely for the experimental art. I invite you to read An Invitation from a Crab if you like experimental manga, or if you've never experimented with experimental manga before and you want to experiment with trying one. Flower by Taiyou Matsumoto is a weird one because it feels so steeped in old folklore type of storytelling, and you're just dropped headfirst into a society centered around beliefs that feel like myths. But in the world of Flower, the line between myth and truth is more blurry than a Puddle of Mud song. The story centers around a family of mask makers whose masks are used in important dances. The two boys in the family are soon to be handed the reins to this trade by their father, but the village has been disappointed with the masks made by Tsubaki, the older brother. They all wish the younger brother Yuri would be allowed to make the masks for them instead. Yuri is much more eccentric than Tsubaki and can see spirits and rarely ever goes outside. Yuri seems to be more in tune with the mystical ideas that make a mask feel right, but he's quite a sensitive person who doesn't really fit into society other than as a mask maker. His dad wants to protect Yuri from the demands of the villagers and to foster his creativity without pressure. But doing this puts a lot of pressure on Tsubaki, of course, and so a lot of the manga explores these relationships, and eventually it turns into a bit of a coming-of-age story for Yuri as those dynamics grow and change. One of the neat storytelling things going on to reinforce this coming-of-age story structure is how the different parts of the manga are broken into seasons. In the beginning, it's fall, and there's a lot of cool instances of using white ink to draw on blacked out panels. Then next in the winter part, there are white panels with a black page background. These visual touches nicely reinforce that there's a change in the setting and the characters, reflected in the change of the seasons. And the manga continues to play with its layout in this way as it goes on in really interesting ways. Now all that being said, I'll admit that Flower is kinda hard to follow at times, but I think the visuals tell enough of a story on an intuitive, emotional level so that even if you lose the plot a bit, you'll still get something out of it. It's really worth a shot because there really is nothing quite like Flower, other than the other works by Taiyou Matsumoto, of course, Go-Go Monster being the most similar. But yeah, check this one out if you want an unorthodox story paired with mind-blowing visuals that will emotionally resonate even if you're a bit lost in the sauce of the weird way the plot unfolds. Hanashippanashi by Daisuke Igarashi isn't just a really fun title to say, it's also really fun to read. This is a collection of short stories about the trippy kinds of connections people have with nature, and also just some weird folklore type of stories. The number one appeal here is definitely the art, which is constantly blowing my mind with the creative panel layouts that highlight Daisuke Igarashi's ethereal and intricate drawings. Now, the stories themselves are a bit more hit and miss than I'm used to from this author, but that doesn't mean the manga is anywhere near bad. You might just read a story about a kid returning a weird big sea slug to the ocean and be like, okay, not sure if there was much meaning there, but goddamn was that pretty. But there are some standout gems, like the first story, which is a character imagining being super tiny and climbing around their cat and discovering the meaning of life and connection to other living beings, and then zooming out to the scale of the universe, only to come back to reality and see that the person was just petting their cat while feeling all these trippy thoughts. Which I found extremely relatable. Petting a cat is a surefire way to feel connected to the universe in my opinion. Anyways, the stories here have a ton of variety. There's a bunch of slice of life, some dip their toe into horror, and others just feel like an urban legend someone would have told you on the playground. They range from mundane to profound, but there's always a thick atmosphere evoked by the meticulous drawings that pulls me in no matter the subject matter. So check this one out if you like folklore kind of stories and you like manga that are willing to experiment and are more focused on evoking abstract feelings over anything else. Okay, I did not expect this in a million years, but Zatch Bell, one of my favorite mangas from when I was a kid, just got a part 2. It was totally unexpected because of how definitive the ending of the original felt. The big tournament where the demons come from the demon world to the human world to decide the king only happened once every 1,000 years, so in order to continue the story with the same characters, they were gonna have to pull off something interesting to even exist. And Zatch Bell 2 somehow pulls this off and reaches that high bar with some incredibly exciting and mysterious opening chapters. Of course, it's also got the classic humor of Zatch Bell, but at least for this opening, the story is a tad bit more serious than the first part. And that makes some sense, since people who read Zatch Bell as a kid are older now and might want something like that, and I would have been fine either way. Just give me more of Kiyomaru's face being absurdly beat up and I'm good. I would have read that every week, but yeah. The story is extremely compelling so far, and the thing that surprised me most is how well thought out the action is. It's really well drawn and paneled, yeah, but the most interesting thing about it is how the odds are always super stacked against Kiyomaru and Zatch Bell to an absurd degree. However, because of their clever tactics and teamwork, they manage to come out on top when they're going up against David versus Goliath type odds. It must be so much harder to choreograph a clever battle of wits like this, rather than to just have the characters suddenly get way more powerful and win out of nowhere right when hope seemed lost, because they learned the power of believing or something. Not that that storytelling style is necessarily a bad thing, I just personally find manga that put more effort into character strategy super fun to read. Anyways, if you're not a fan of the original Zatch Bell, this will go over your head, so I recommend reading the original first, but if you're already a fan, this will peel your potato and leave you flabbergasted at the fact that a series that originally ended in 2007 could come back so strongly. Versus is the latest manga with art by Kyoutarou Azuma and writing from some dude named One that you've probably never heard of. I think they did that manga called like Panpanya or something like that. Okay, yeah, this was a highly anticipated new fresh series from someone who's only put out bangers, and as far as I'm concerned, we've got another classic on our hands. Versus starts off playing with rather generic fantasy tropes in a world where humanity is on the brink of defeat at the hands of demons. Seems pretty simple, but this is a One manga, where if you see a trope, you know they're gonna spin it on its head. The first bit of intrigue that really hooked me was when the mage character starts explaining the magic system to the main character, and how if you, say, mess up a teleportation spell on something like an apple, instead of the original apple teleporting, you end up with a weird-ass mysterious apple that looks like it came from the Shinigami world from Death Note. So if the teleportation failed and the original's still on the tree, then where is this new apple coming from? Well, if you want to find out for yourself, I'd highly recommend you jump into the manga now, cause from here on I'll be spoiling the first chapter's amazing twist. So yeah, the big ol' twist at the end of the first chapter is that there's alternate dimensions out there, which explains where that Death Note apple came from. So, the mage character and all his buddies use their combined powers to summon that whole other alternate dimension right here into our world. And when they do, futuristic laser beam shooting soldiers show up and start wrecking the demons, and it looks like the day is saved until the dust settles and they stroll up to the mages and say, "Thank God you're here, our world is on the brink of collapse, you have to help us." And this is just like the funniest, most mind-blowing twist, and then from there the story just keeps on developing at a breakneck pace, and I've been left wanting more after every chapter. Right now there's only a handful of them out, but keep a close eye on the monthly updates, cause you're not gonna want to miss one chapter of this new One manga. Toys Harmful But Unprohibited by Shino is a series of short stories that is so weirdly original in the stories that it wants to tell and how little it cares about any conventions of manga. Like, how about we just go into absurd amounts of detail about the machinations of made-up inventions, like this thing that looks like a cassette player with a headband attached to it that somehow predicts what you're going to draw in a few days and then shows it to you? Of course, immediately, the one character is like, aren't you just gonna draw that later because it showed it to you now? So then they think that, well, what would happen if you really felt like you weren't gonna draw something? Would the page be blank? Well, here's a graph of the possible outcomes, and here's plenty of lengthy paragraphs of speculation that all builds up to the big reveal on this next page. Yep, it's blank, and then that little story thread just ends there. On to the next weird invention, I guess. That's only the structure of the first story though, a bunch of odd inventions and these two friends going over them. But each chapter after that explores a similarly weird concept in just as absurd amounts of thorough detail. Like, one is about someone whose world froze in time around them and they spend like a billion trillion years doing random stuff like collecting every single pin from every fire extinguisher in the country, or inventing a new language and writing a 20 million character novel with it. All these weird stories have such a whimsy to them, while still having a creeping sense of darkness in the background to a lot of them, making a truly wild vibe. Check this one out if you like experimental manga like the ones by Panpanya, or if you just like seeing the absurd limits of the human imagination explored in the weirdest of ways. So there's 10 new manga you can try out. At this point, this is the 7th top 10 manga video I've done, which means I've burned through 70 manga that I love, and honestly, the well is running dry over here, so please let me know what's got you hooked right now in the comments, and while you're at it, why not post your favorite text-based smiley face? Mine's this. Alright, that's all I've got for now, so see you in the next vid, and have a slammin' day.